Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's wonderful to see you all signing in, and I hope I might say that you've made a very wise and great choice in doing so and choosing to spend your Thursday evening here with us, or of course, morning or afternoon or middle of the night, or whatever time it is, depending on where in the world you're signing in from. And I am delighted, wherever you may be, to welcome you on behalf of the How To Academy for a really very important conversation and a subject that undeniably needs to be talked about loudly and a lot, but one that's complex, difficult to articulate, and which is very hard to strike the right tone around. And as it often is when it comes to sharing the truth about uncomfortable subjects, no matter how many people might profoundly relate to it. So the book that has inspired our event this evening really is hugely welcome and a very important one. And I'm thrilled to be talking about it on its publication day, no less. So it's the bright and bold, inside and out book, How to Leave Your Psychopath, the essential handbook for escaping toxic relationships. It's written, many of you it'll be on its way to you, and you'll see, with just the right amount of pathos and humor and clarity, drawn from personal experience and a great deal of research. So it's an informative and accessible look at abusive relationships, why people are drawn to them, why they stay in them, and perhaps most importantly, in the end, recognize them for what they are, how to get out of them, which we'll see isn't easy. But I'm delighted to welcome its author to be our best and very animated of guides. She is a comedian, an actor, Women's Aid ambassador, and now, of course, author. She's appeared in sitcoms for BBC Three, BBC One, I think all the channels, ITV, Channel 4. She's had endless sellout comedy shows at all the coveted venues, and her show Herselves was nominated Best New Show at Leicester Comedy Festival. She's performed, as I say, at all the venues that you would imagine: Underbelly, Edinburgh, including that one where she was shortlisted for The Voice's pick of the Fringe. But I could keep going with all the accolades, but I think we should get to the subject. So thank you all very much, as I said, for signing in. And Maddy, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and happy publication day.
Thank you. And thank you for that lovely intro. That was really good.
Oh.
I like that. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So a lot of times in the book, you address various readers. You say at the very beginning, I'm going to assume one of three things about you, dear reader. So I wonder, who were you talking to? Did you have your reader in mind, a number of readers, or is there a sense in which it's a book for everyone?
Yeah, all of the above, really. It is a book for everyone, but I think it's funny, it depends what stage you're at in terms of where you're dating, or if you are in a toxic relationship or not, because there's sort of stages of awareness. And I know myself that this happened, that, you know, when you're in it, you cannot see it for what it is. You know, you're too busy, I mean, really too busy surviving. So to those people, it would be a kind of, I feel like something's a bit wrong here. And so I may pick up this book and then I'm going to start getting my eyes opened. But it's also to the readers that have been through these relationships and don't want to repeat the same cycles. It's also for those who maybe know people who are in these kind of relationships, controlling relationships, and they want to help, they want to get people out of them, or simply for people who, you know, want to find healthy love. You know, you don't need to have been through a whole heartache and horrific abusive relationship to enjoy this book. So I hope it's an every book. It's an every book for everyone.
Mm. And a lot is drawn from your own experience. So we will go into that, of course, over the next sort of hour, and there'll be room, I should say, for audience questions. So please do write them in the Q&A box, and I'll come to those at the end. But I wonder if you could explain whether it was sort of, whether you set out or whether it eventually was a cathartic process writing it.
I think, yes. I mean, you know, the journey of this book was quite strange, actually. So I, as you said at the beginning, so I did a lot of comedy hours. This was going to be my 5th comedy hour. It was originally called How to Train Your Psychopath. And it was going to be a comedy hour. And to be honest, it was right before the pandemic, and I just started working. I'd actually been booked for Underbelly. I was going to do Edinburgh and kind of tour from there. And what I probably did a handful of shows, 8, 9, 10 shows. And in that time when I was doing those shows, what I began to understand is how many people this related to. And it really opened my eyes. You know, after I've never done a show where at the end people are queuing to say, listen to my story. I went through this too. So that's when I began to realize, you know, wow, this is something, you know, there's a conversation that needs to be had here. And then the pandemic hit. So, you know, the tour got cancelled, you know, I couldn't do anything about it. And then I felt very disappointed, you know, for the obvious reasons, but also because I'd spent a good year, you know, going back through therapy. I'd had, you know, years of it already, but, you know, back through therapy and working on my inner strength to be able to feel in a position of power to share this story. Because, you know, there's a difference between vulnerability and being exposed. And I was prepared to be vulnerable, but I was not prepared to be exposed. So I had just cut that line in my stand-up hour. And then I couldn't do it. And so I just happened to be doing a podcast with a very good friend of mine, Sam Delaney, and we were having a chat and he was like, what have you been up to? And me actually having done nothing because it was a pandemic and we all sat in our pants, as we know, I said, I was thinking of writing a book, actually, Sam. I wasn't at the time at all. And he said, oh, what's it about? And I was like, it's probably psychopaths. Something like that. And then he said, you know, he's been helping me all through my career, actually. He said, well, you know, give me a sample. And I was like, oh, God, I'm just, you know, we're going through a pandemic. I don't need more. And then he pushed me again about 6 weeks later and said, you know, where are you at? And so I ended up giving him a bit of a synopsis of the book, which he then said, do you mind if I pass on to someone? And he happened to pass it on to his wife, Anna, who I didn't realize at the time was the powerhouse literary agent from AMP Literary. And we signed, and the rest is history. So the journey of this book has actually come from a real place of true stand-up, from comedy. And then it's gone kind of through this articulation of a lot of research, of working with experts and finding that level of what's relatable and how can people learn from this.
And I mean, that it's just sticking with that sort of comedy, because people might think, okay, this is confusing. This doesn't sound very funny at all.
That's right.
And I wonder if you could explain, you know, that it's not a new concept, that you perhaps want to use comedy to kind of bring humor to very dark subjects. And did that feel like the right fit for this subject matter to you? Was it a way of making sense of it for you, basically?
Yeah, I've always been one of those people who, for right or wrong, laughs at maybe the worst of situations because I feel like that's maybe a good coping mechanism. I'm not sure. But in this instance, you know, I think, like I say, when I was doing this, the work in progresses of the comedy of this, I kind of shied away actually from the depth and the darkness that I wanted to go into, because I thought, oh God, how can you do that on stage? And then there were a couple of shows where I did delve into it, and I did almost like a monologue really for about 2 to 3 minutes, which was a bit of a freestyle monologue where I just spoke about my experiences, and then was able to you know, Hannah Gadsby does it brilliantly in Nanette, which is on Netflix now, but this kind of holding your audience in a place of tension and being responsible for caring for them, but then releasing them through laughter. And what that does is it holds you as an audience member. You know, there's an amount of personability that happens. You want to hear what that person is saying. And I think if someone's kind of lecturing at you, I mean, it's like when you're in one of these relationships, if someone is saying, you need to get out of this, it's bad for you, everyone can see it's bad for you, you switch off. That is not what you want to hear. You know, you're already exhausted and fearful and intimidated and whatever. But if someone, you know, meets you where you are at your level with an element of comedy and humor and lightness, you start opening up. And you know, a comedy audience, without even realizing it, has been taught stuff through comedy. So the two actually go perfectly hand in hand.
It's just so interesting hearing you sort of explain it like that, and perhaps then before we get into lots of those things and get down a bit further into what this is about and what exactly a psychopath is in this scenario, or is altogether. Just perhaps, and it's a big question, and it really feeds in throughout the whole book, but this is about personal experience, as you said. I just wonder if you could sort of broadly explain why this is so personal to you, because you're not writing this out of pure understanding of other people's problems. This is something that's happened very acutely to you and quite a lot throughout your life.
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, I'll start this by saying that this is it's not a revenge book. It's not a kiss and tell. This is a handbook. That word has been selected very carefully because it's a survival guide. It's a handbook to help people escape these relationships. So this comes from a place of a decade's worth of tumbling in and out of controlling relationships, of toxic relationships, of a place where, I mean, so many times I would just sit there going, why does this keep happening? Why do I keep meeting the same partner? And it's this cycle of, it doesn't matter the time scale, but it's the cycle of, I will give them everything and do everything for them and not, I'll completely lay my heart on the line and I'll get trampled. But it's beyond getting trampled. It would be getting coerced, controlled, degraded, all of these words, until finally the person responsible, the perpetrator, would have enough and discard you, and then you'd be left kind of open and broken, and and this would keep happening, and it happened for a decade, and I didn't know what the word for it was, but I just looked at everyone else and said, why can't I have that? What's happening here? And so it wasn't until the very end that it was really, in the book, I have 3 particular relationships. They kind of grow with clout. It wasn't until the end, the very last one, that I really was very nearly annihilated. And it wasn't a choice. I just said, this has got to stop, and I've got to find a way to make it stop. And whatever that was, it was more than not just not dating. It was finding the root cause. But for myself, it didn't work that I was reading dense psychological textbooks about what happens to the, in the narcissistic brain or whatever. Because I was like, I don't know, I can't understand this. But I knew that something needed to happen. And through an NHS crisis counsellor, through working with various brilliant minds and experts, and I began to really understand what was happening to me and understand the patterns, which is, something we'll talk about later, the importance of seeing patterns. But so, yeah, it's come from 10 years of controlling relationships and surviving them.
You define in the book, like a great deal and very specifically and well, the 2 people involved in any relationship, the perpetrator and the victim. So perhaps we should have a look at that and the definitions of what's going on here. You talk about controls all the way through. So perhaps you could explain what you mean by controls and the spelling of that.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because, as you said rightly at the beginning, I'm a Women's Aid ambassador, and Women's Aid are, they say that actually victims are those who have lost their lives in domestic abuse, and survivors are people who are either in them and about to get out, or like me, who have got out. So, in the book, I kind of intermix the 2, but I'm just sort of flagging that as a interesting thought. But, in terms of the perpetrator, what I wanted to do with this book was I wanted to make it as relatable as possible. I wanted to be the big sister. I wanted to be the best friend, who was ready to listen and be judgment-free. And the way that I was going to do that was to remove as much of this kind of clinical language as possible. And what's happened with psychopaths, if you look at, the media, what's happened with psychopaths is they've been kind of glorified. They are this like dark mystique that's sort of lurking in the shadows, and we are drawn to them. It's human nature. We think, oh my God, they're so exciting. Let me learn more about them. And I wanted to really strongly move away from that. I wanted to change the gaze and stop looking through the eyes of the perpetrator and start looking through the eyes of the survivor or the victim. And so I created this word. I wanted to create a word for controlling personality types, that can range up to psychopaths, but it's narcissists, it's even people with learned controlling behavior. And I realized there wasn't a word. You can be clinical, but there was nothing for the every person, the layman. So I created this word controls, CONTROLLS. It was actually a very difficult thing to come up with. We had various different, I think one of them we had was blanks, but that's being used. We had various, because they've got blank faces, various different kind of words for it. And then I hit on controls because they control your life, but they also troll your life. They seek to bring you down in every area of your life, of your existence. So it felt like a perfect fit. And it also did not add to their mystique.
You do write in that brilliant friend sister way, and I know you were kind about my introduction, but I don't think I was able to encapsulate quite how well you do that through lots of things, drawings, kind of light comedy, and it makes it very easy to read a very difficult subject matter, but there's lots of very sort of relatable, the way you diarize the entries and things like that are really effective. But the psychopath is, you've just said it's dramatized perhaps in our perception in the media, but therefore it's an extreme word. We think of psychopath as something pretty extreme, but in the book, as you say, it's a slightly different interpretation or definition. And it's one, I mean, you say, for example, that we all have displayed psychopathic tendencies. So I suppose, what sort of a psychopath are you talking about or focusing on that differs from other, what we might imagine a psychopath is?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you think of psychopath, you think, Christian Bale in, American Psycho, it's that kind of Wall Street or, torturing animals or something like that. But, what that does is that moves us that away, that the idea of a psychopath, it moves it away from us, but we need to start bringing our knowledge towards us, if that makes sense. So, the figures are an estimated 1 in 100 of us are psychopaths. So what do I mean by that? Well, I make it very clear at the beginning of the book that I'm not a psychologist and I'm not claiming to be a psychologist, but I have 10 years worth of lived experience. And that's what I'm going to bring, as you said at the beginning, with a lot of research. So a psychopath in that sense, there's a couple of different types, there is no one type of psychopath. It's very nuanced. And you have, those who have the actual wiring. I go into it in a little detail in the book, what actually happens in the brain of a psychopath, or genetic psychopath, or you have the kind of learned psychopathic behavior. And that's your kind of nature nurture that can come from a family setting. That's your role model has been, let's just say, I don't know, a father that's been abusive to the mother. You've grown up thinking that that's it, it's fight or flight. And so it's no wonder that they've learned it. But yeah, I think the whole idea really is, when you're in an abusive relationship, you try everything that you can do to not believe that it's abusive, because that's hard work. It's in a very odd way, and this is difficult for people to get their heads around if they haven't been in these relationships. It's easier for you to stay and put up with it than it is to leave, because the longer you're in it, the more, through various different tools that they use against you, the more your self-esteem is chipped away, the more you are degraded, the more your confidence is shot to pieces, you're exhausted. And so you don't have that cognitive ability to say, this isn't right, I'm dating a psychopath, I'm going to leave. You'd rather just stay. And so what I'm trying to do in the book is to speak to those people and say, look, don't be put off. Don't think, well, this guy or this person I'm dating is not a psychopath, so I'm okay. What I want you to do is just start noticing some of the patterns, notice You know, if something doesn't feel right, you don't need to act on it yet, but just bring some awareness to it.
Do you think